Chapter 41. It had been a long haul for everyone who'd been involved with Pilgrim. Hansford and Dashwood had woken up in different hospitals. Hansford was at a military hospital in Suffolk, and Dashwood at a private clinic outside of Edinburgh. Both men remembered vividly what had happened, but remained silent on the matter. Hansford had suffered a broken arm, dislocated scapula, and multiple fractures to his ribs, whilst Dashwood's femur had split and 2 of his spinal vertebrae had sustained hairline fractures. Each lay uncomfortably incapacitated, with months of physio ahead of them. Hansford had been forced to spend several weeks in hospital after developing a fever which had crucified his body. During his delirium, he'd called out to Neath as her image haunted his days and nights. Eventually he'd recovered, unprepared for the impact of a loss which now left him stranded in a life that was tasteless and without colour. He'd had one visitor for 10 minutes. Draper had arrived with a bag of grapes and the admonishment if Hansford couldn't handle one woman with a seasoned SWAT team, he deserved to get his ass kicked. When Hansford had quietly reminded him Pilgrim had not been like other women, Draper had responded by saying it was a poor excuse and had left with the words, "I'm back to work. Some of us still have a job." Hansford couldn't have cared less. Dashwood had suffered from the attentions of over-solicitous nurses. Brian had visited with an improvised and rambling epitaph for Pilgrim, predictably studded with pauses for him to collect himself. Dashwood had been mindful of Brian's grief, as he'd listened to him worry aloud about what was the best thing to do, considering Pilgrim's body hadn't been recovered. This came as no great surprise to Dashwood, who believed she must have vaporized like so much of their apartment at one time or another. Brian had finally left, saying, "Things are never going to be the same without Baxter and Pilgrim." Knowing Brian's experience of Pilgrim was considerably less than his, he'd agreed. On a sunlit morning, Hansford had entered a waiting taxi, grateful to anyone who'd take him back to normality. He'd found a reason to continue. He'd find Baxter's killer and go out in a blaze of glory. Draper had sent a message that Hansford's hiatus was over and to stop milking the system. Dashwood had received a letter on La Amethyst stationery with the distinctive calligraphy of Mr. Mylar. It had asked him to report back at his earliest convenience. Dashwood and Hansford were both determined to re-enter their interrupted lives, carrying their heavy burden of knowledge. There'd be no escape from the memory of Pilgrim for the rest of their lives. Neither one considered renewing old acquaintances advisable.